So let's start with a pretty wild thought. What if everything you perceive, the fundamental particles, the objects around you, even space-time itself, what if it isn't fundamentally static?
Mm.
What if it's all just a temporary ripple, like
Yep.
in an unending governed stream of, well,
Very the
becoming?
stream of becoming.
What if reality is more like an active verb, not just a passive noun sitting there?
That's a fantastic way to put it. And it's pretty much the radical world-altering premise right at the heart of generative ontology, or BRIGO. BRIGO.
Right.
Yeah, this theoretical framework proposed by Philip Randolph Lillian, it really demands that we, abandon the classical idea, the idea of reality being built from unchanging substances.
Like little building blocks.
Exactly. And instead, we need to embrace reality as this continuous, structured, dynamic process.
Okay, so today we're undertaking a pretty critical deep dive into the sources detailing Brie. And these are, they're dense, highly technical document.
Lots of formal mathematics in there.
Definitely. And this proposed four-layer architecture for the universe. So our mission, really, is to take this huge stack of theory, synthesize the core principles, the intricate math, and the, frankly, surprisingly wide-ranging predictions.
They really do span quite a range.
They do. And turn all that into clear, actionable knowledge for you listening.
And I think the central paradigm shift, the thing we have to grapple with right away is this. Generative ontology defines reality purely as a dynamic process, this idea of continuous becoming.
Continuous becoming.
So the things we interact with, particles, fields, matter, they are simply what Lillian calls temporary stabilized resonances within this overarching, continuously governed system.
So like stable eddies forming in a complex perpetual flow.
That's a great analogy.
Yes.
They aren't the fundamental building blocks themselves.
Right. They're the emergent products of this whole architecture.
Exactly.
Okay, so our roadmap for navigating this complexity. Well, it starts by understanding the quantitative measure of this flow. You mentioned structure, so how do we measure it? This idea of a coherence.
Precisely. Coherence is key.
Then we'll step through the four-stage reduction cascade that supposedly constructs reality. Then we'll dissect the powerful geometric mathematics tying it all together.
Which is fascinating in itself.
And finally, we'll look at the theory's startling, testable predictions, which, as you said, span everything from physics to biology.
Physics, quantum mechanics, even developmental biology. Yes.
Wow. Okay, let's get started.
Hey.
All right, let's tackle maybe the biggest conceptual hurdle first. We are moving away entirely from this idea of substance, the thing that's anchored Western philosophy since, the ancient Greeks.
It's a huge shift. Here, everything is generated. It's continuously being generated.
So the universe isn't just there. It's actively doing something to maintain itself.
That emphasis on process over substance is the absolute philosophical bedrock of ego. We define entities, say, an electron or even a galaxy, not by what they are fundamentally.
Not by their isness.
Exactly, but by the processes that sustain their temporary stability. They are the emergent stabilizations that arise from this underlying dynamic, continuous process. It's like the universe's ongoing act of creation constantly happening.
Okay, but reality is this dynamic flow. How do we get past the philosophy and into the science? How do we quantify stability or, movement within a field that's constantly shifting?
That is precisely why the coherence functional, usually written as math-pack-and-tuck, is introduced. It's the key quantitative measure. Think of it as the metric used to score the state of reality itself.
Okay, let's unpack this functional thesis. What is it actually measuring, and how is it standardized?
Right. So math-pack-and-tuck is defined as a specific measure of order and structure for any given state. Let's call the state. And crucially, it's normalized. It ranges between 0 and 1.
0 and 1. Okay.
So a state pack-and-tuck where the math cocal equals 1 represents maximum coherence. Think pure, perfect, undifferentiated potentiality. Just potential.
Ultimate blank slate.
Kind of, yeah. Conversely, mathematical dollars represents minimum coherence, a total disorder, essentially. And the entire evolution of the universe within the Dugo framework is basically the management and, critically, the reduction of this coherence score.
Right, because if the universe is dynamic, the dynamics must be defined by how this score changes over time.
Exactly. And the source material defines the change in coherence, Jorgen DTT, as being governed by two opposing yet coupled operations.
Two forces at play.
You could say that. The first are symmetry operations, denoted by Sivu dollars. These are defined as the flows that preserve coherence.
Preserve it. Okay.
Mathematically, this just means the rate of change of coherence is 0. bore rate equals $0. This ensures there's underlying stability and continuity within the system, like the persistent motion of a perfectly stable wave that just keeps going.
GEOA sounds a bit like the physics of conservation laws we know, the persistence of form, energy, momentum.
It is absolutely the generator of persistence, but then there's the second and arguably more revolutionary operation, the asymmetry generator, and A for asymmetry.
Right. This generator represents the flows that reduce coherence, and the sources explicitly label $A as being analogous to observation.
Analogous to observation. That sounds significant. What does that imply?
Well, it implies that when asymmetry or observation acts, the coherence functional can only decrease or at best stay the same. So coherence can't spontaneously increase overall.
Wait a second. If the foundational metric of reality, this coherence score, can only stay the same or decrease, doesn't that fundamentally contradict things we see, like self-organization or the creation of local complexity? I mean, we see crystal structures forming, life developing, systems that definitely look like they're increasing local order.
Ah, yes.
How does GE account for systems that seem to increase local coherence if the fundamental dynamic only allows for eight-couple destruction?
Well, that's a really crucial question, and it points directly to the architecture we'll discuss in Section 2, the reduction cascade. Lillian argues that while the total coherence of the foundational state is perpetually reducing,
the emergence of complex local structure is achieved by essentially projecting the lost coherence. So the structure we observe, like that crystal or a living cell, is literally the differentiation caused by that fundamental loss of overall coherence.
So local order is like a structured byproduct of the overall decrease.
Precisely. Local order or self-organization, it's seen as a pattern maintained by high energy density in what's called the derived layer, layer 4, but it's still fundamentally rooted in the overall irreversible reduction of the initial coherence. It's complexity arising from the collapse, if you will, of pure potentiality.
I see. So the reduction isn't just random noise, it's a structured projection. Okay, that leads us directly to the mechanism that governs this whole flow, the meta-operator.
Right. The meta-operator, written as para-T, is presented as the engine governing the state's evolution over time. It blends these two fundamental forces we mentioned, persistence, driven by dollars, and reduction, driven by a phyli.
And the formula given is AKES, XPTS. Now, those exponential terms, XPTST, they suggest something more than simple linear motion, right? It looks more like a continuous, maybe infinite application of these generators over time into nullars.
Precisely. In physics, especially in areas like quantum field theory, an operator raised exponentially, like XPE, usually signifies a continuous infinitesimal transformation. It's the mathematical signature of smooth evolution over time. So the dollar component, the symmetry generator, dictates that smooth, conserved flow that preserves the state's potential. If only dollars were acting, the universe would just flow eternally in some undifferentiated, highly coherent state. No change, really.
But that's not what we see. So the presence of XPA ensures that doesn't happen.
That's the key. The asymmetry generator acts as the mechanism for irreversible change. It represents the coherence-reducing flows, the disruptive element, if you like, that forces differentiation.
Observation analog.
Exactly. When add dollars is non-zero, the universe can't simply flow. It must change state, lose coherence, and project complexity. And the loss of coherence itself, how fast it happens, that's quantified by something called the reduction rate functional, gamma psi. Yeah, this functional mathematically defines the exact rate of coherence loss. It ensures that the emergence of observable reality is a quantifiable, predictable process tied directly to the action of asymmetry, of $. It's essentially the mathematical definition of decay from pure potentiality into actual structure.
Okay, so the meta-operator MMT defines the continuous process of coherence reduction. But you mentioned this reduction isn't just random noise, it's highly architectural. It's organized into 4 specific stages, which Lillian calls the reduction cascade.
Exactly. The cascade is presented as the physical map of the universe's emergence. It's modeled as a sequence of structured projections. Think of them like filters or layers, usually denoted pi1
pi1 so on.
Right. Starting from the initial pure state Sikri dollars and ultimately deriving all observable reality through these projections. It's like 4 mandatory steps the universe takes to get from pure potentiality to the manifest phenomena we see around us.
And importantly, as we discussed with the issue of local order versus global decay, although coherence is lost at each step, there's a fundamental conservation law governing the whole cascade, isn't there?
Yes, this is the critical architectural stabilizer. the cascade invariant. It states that although coherence is lost at every step, $2, so the change, delta mathcalar, is greater than or equal to 0.
So coherence always goes down or stays the same at each step.
Right. But the total sum of all these losses across the entire cascade must precisely equal the difference between the initial maximum coherence, math delta, which is 1, and the final coherence of the fully manifested state.
So sigma delta math caltech.
Exactly. It ensures the entire system remains deterministic and balanced in a way. The system's entire initial budget of coherence must be accounted for by the differentiation, the structure it generates. Nothing is lost without consequence.
Okay, let's jump into layer 1 then, the foundation. The hololectic layer. This sounds like the starting gun for reality.
The hololectic layer is defined by that initial state, hashed by $. It is the state of pure, undifferentiated potentiality we talked about. Mathematically, its defining features are maximum coherence, math Baldurum.
The perfect score.
The perfect score. And its vacuum state, which is represented by something called the vacuum coherence tensor, $, is in its maximally coherent reference state, denoted $, as V star. It's pure possibility, just waiting to be structured.
And this starting point, this mathcalters 1, is anchored in what the source calls the seed equation axiom. This is where the mathematical and philosophical elegance really seems to come through, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's quite profound, actually. The entire formal framework of generative ontology is proposed to be rooted in two fundamental mathematical identities. $0 equals Lumen, 0 factorial equals 1, and $0 equals 1, 0 to the power of 0 equals 1.
Just those two simple equations.
Lillian posits that these foundational identities, which essentially define the relationship between 0 and unity, nothingness, and oneness, are the axiomatic seed. The seed from which all subsequent geometry, structure, and evolution mathematically emerge.
Wow.
It's a bold assertion that the universe begins not with matter or energy, but with pure, self-referential mathematical consistency.
That's a really deep conceptual claim. It implies that before there's physics, there has to be mathematics, and that mathematics itself defines the boundary condition of maximum coherence, mathcal C1.
That seems to be the inference, yes. If the initial state, Chanel-Noller, is fundamentally derived from these self-consistent axioms, it possesses the maximum possible coherence. And from this state of pure mathematical potential, we then flow into layer 2.
Layer 2, called Shit and Little Bear. What defines this one?
Layer 2 is characterized by being governed only by the coherence-preserving symmetry flow of Seyo-Zeller.
Right, Sebius preserves coherence. Lands call Kel-D segens 5, so nothing is being observed or reduced yet.
Exactly. This is the phase of reality, purely theoretical perhaps, where the potential is flowing and evolving smoothly, but no irreversible reduction, no observation via otherler has occurred.
So it's like a pristine theoretical flow state, just maintaining that perfect coherence from layer 1.
Precisely. This means certain mathematical properties called coherence eigenvalues, lambda will likely come back to those, are perfectly conserved here, and that vacuum coherence tensor, it's just transported through this layer without any reduction, differentiation, or structural change. It maintains its initial vase star state.
Like the blueprint flowing freely before the construction actually begins.
A good way to visualize it. Then we hit the major turning point. Layer 3, the relational layer. You said this is where the structural integrity of V star is shattered and differentiation begins. Here's where it gets really interesting, as you say. Layer 3 is the critical pivot. This is where the asymmetry generator, the one explicitly identified as the observer function or interaction operator, finally acts upon that coherent flow coming from layer 2.
The OCA kicks in here.
Yes. The relational layer defines the necessary constraints and relationships that allow observable structures to eventually emerge in the next layer.
And the action of ADOR generates those two major consequences we linked back to the core principles earlier.
Exactly. Consequence 1. The activation of irreversible coherence reduction. Now, Mathnenko Kid DT becomes strictly negative, or at least non-positive Forte. The universe begins its deterministic slide away from pure potentiality.
A fall from grace, so to speak.
You could put it that way. And consequence 2 is the structural split. That undifferentiated vacuum coherence tensor, DV star, is projected into its specific geometric components. This is the mechanism by which structure is actually born. Splits into curvature, torsion, and chirality.
And this split isn't just some arbitrary geometric exercise. It's proposed as the direct physical consequence of the process of observation or interaction, the act of differentiating the state TTA dollar.
That's the powerful claim being made. And we should probably pause on that analogous to observation phrase again.
Right, because it sounds like it needs a conscious observer.
It does, and that's a frequent misunderstanding. When the source material says I dollar is analogous to observation, it's crucial to understand that in Irawago, the asymmetry generator dollar does not necessarily require consciousness.
Okay, so what does it represent then?
It simply represents any physical process that causes a non-reversible loss of information or symmetry, any interaction that projects the state tiler into a lower coherence configuration. It's essentially the mathematical operator for interaction itself. Ah, I see. So the interaction of, say, a photon with an electron, a standard physical measurement event that's enough to qualify as the action of dollars. And that causes the coherence reduction and leads to the structural split, giving us the geometric ingredients for reality.
Precisely. That interaction is an instance of I-dollar acting, and that split gives us Tegake, T, and $6, which are the raw materials for layer 4.
Layer 4, the derived layer. This is our reality, isn't it?
Layer 4 is the final projection. It contains all manifest phenomena that are detectable and measurable. This includes all the geometric and energetic manifestations we know, particles, fields, gravity, electromagnetism, everything.
And crucially, the source material explicitly includes qualia in this final layer. Qualia being, the subjective experience of the world, the redness of red, the feeling of pain.
Yes, that's a significant inclusion. Qualia are not treated as some separate external mystery. They are considered structured, manifest phenomena generated by the final projection of the cascade, just like particles or fields. So it's asserting a fully integrated, maybe non-dualistic explanation for consciousness.
Yeah.
Tied directly to the geometric dynamics of the vacuum itself.
That appears to be the implication, yes.
Oh.
And just to close the loop, as mandated by that cascade invariant, the total sum of all coherence reduction across these 4 stages is fully accounted for by that initial value minus the final value, mathcal path casin. The architecture is complete and self-consistent in that sense. So we've sketched out the 4-layer architecture. Now let's focus a bit more on the mathematical engine that drives this structure. And it really seems centered entirely around that vacuum coherence tensor, $5.
Right, and we need to reinforce that val dollar isn't just some abstract concept in this theory. It's supposed to encode the actual structure of the dynamic vacuum, the field of pure flow and potential that underlies everything we see.
And in layer 3, the relational layer, we saw that VIL decomposes. It splits into 3 essential geometric sectors. VIL plus K plus X. Dollars is identified with curvature, which we usually associate with space-time deformation, gravity. Dollars is torsion, which relates more to rotational degrees of freedom, spin, maybe defects or twists in the vacuum structure. And $6 is chirality, which relates to the handedness or asymmetry of reality.
Okay, and the theory gets, well, scientifically interesting because it assigns measurable properties to these geometric sectors through an eigenvalue equation, right? Lambda var phi.
Yeah.
What's the physical consequence of solving this equation?
The solutions to this equation are the eigenvalues, the lambda. These are predicted to be non-negative real numbers. And importantly, they are proposed as fundamental, measurable coherence constants of the universe.
Like new fundamental constants of nature.
Sort of, yes. Specific numeric values like Planck's constant or the speed of light, maybe that must hold true across all the layers of derived reality. Finding these lambda values experimentally is, therefore, one of the primary goals for validating GEOR.
That's concrete. Now, what's also fascinating is that these 3 geometric sectors, P, O, T, X, C, they aren't independent floating around, are they? They're mathematically locked together by strict constraint equations. It keeps the whole system coherent, presumably.
These constraints are absolutely vital for the theory's internal consistency. The first constraint mentioned links curvature directly to torsion. Curvature is the curl of torsion. Mathematically, nabla times T.
Okay, wait. Dalbla times T. That feels like a significant departure from, say, general relativity, where curvature is typically linked only to the stress energy tensor to mass and energy density. Here, curvature is generated by the rotational flow, the curl of the torsion field itself.
Exactly. It makes space-time curvature an emergent property that's dictated by the local dynamics of this torsion field to Stallers. It's a different mechanism for generating gravity, in essence.
Wow. And the second constraint?
The second equally powerful constraint links chirality $6 to torsion. It states that chirality is the Hodge dual of torsion. Kamabel se startuga.
Hodge dual. Okay, that term might be unfamiliar to some listeners. Conceptually, just the gist. What does it mean for chirality to be the Hodge dual of torsion.
Right. Conceptually, the Hodge dual operation takes a mathematical object like a vector or a tensor field, in this case torsion dollars, and maps it into its sort of complementary object within the given geometric space.
This other half, almost.
In a manner of speaking, yes. If torsion, $2, defines local rotational structure, its Hodge dual chirality is $6, defines the structure related to the inherent asymmetry of that rotation, its handedness, its mirror image properties. It's a mathematical way of ensuring that the geometric structure of the vacuum is self-consistent, that every structural component has an asymmetry right into the vacuum structure.
Okay, so torsion seems really central here. It's linked directly to both curvature and chirality.
Yeah.
$6. That prominence must mean torsion is key to explain some fundamental physical properties, like mass, perhaps.
You've absolutely hit on what is perhaps the most striking consequence of this geometric structure proposed by Jack. Mass is not fundamental.
Not fundamental at all.
Not in the sense of being an intrinsic property that you just have to assign to a particle, like in the standard model before Higgs. In generative ontology, mass is proposed to be entirely emergent from the geometry.
How does the geometric structure generate mass? What's the mechanism?
Mass is said to emerge entirely from the localized stability created by the pinning of torsion within the vacuum structure.
Pinning of torsion, like it gets stuck.
Kind of, yeah. When the dynamic torsion flow, $2, becomes locally stabilized, essentially trapped or fixed in a persistent configuration, that localized structural defect, that pinned torsion, manifests itself as what we perceive and measure as mass. It's presented as a purely geometric explanation for inertia.
So, okay, compare that to, say, the Higgs mechanism. Higgs suggests mass arises from interaction with a scalar field that permeates space, providing resistance to motion. Go seems to be saying, no, mass is the localized geometric structure of torsion itself.
That's the critical contrast, yes. Mass, in Go, is specifically stated to be proportional to the integral of the squared norm, like the intensity or energy density, of the torsion sector over a given region. The formal relation is 1 null propto int T2 d sigma.
Okay, let me parse that. The mass is proportional to the total amount of pinned torsion energy density within a defined volume.
Precisely. It dictates the measured mass of whatever emergent entity corresponds to that pinned structure. It's a direct quantitative measure of how much coherence was locally spent or reduced to maintain that stable structure against the general flow.
This establishes a direct link between the geometry of the vacuum, the process of coherence reduction, pinning d dollars, and emergent physical properties like mass, which implies if we could somehow locally control the torsion field, could we, in theory, modulate or even eliminate mass by undoing that pinning?
That thought experiment captures the theoretical implication perfectly. If you could reverse the action of the asymmetry generator $8 that stabilized that specific torsion configuration, you'd essentially dissolve the mass entity back into the hololectic flow state, back into layer 2 potentiality.
All right, this is where the rubber meets the road, so to speak.
Yeah.
Generative ontology isn't just a beautiful mathematical construction, potentially. It claims to be a scientific theory because it makes specific, quantifiable, testable predictions that should, in principle, deviate from established models like the standard model or GR in certain regimes.
That's right. If it didn't make testable predictions, it would remain philosophy, not physics.
So let's look at the front lines of potential experimental validations, starting with physics. What are the key predictions there?
The theory offers several potentially clear signatures in high-precision experiments. For instance, in quantum optics and quantum electrodynamics, QED, Go predicts observable spectral splitting in highly constrained systems, specifically things like cavity QED setups and certain types of engineered metamaterials.
Okay, cavity QED. Why there specifically? And what exactly would this splitting look like? We were talking about light spectra, right?
Yes, light spectra. Cavity QED systems involve trapping photons between highly reflective mirrors, forcing them to interact very intensely with either a small amount of matter placed inside or just with the vacuum field itself.
Right, amplifying subtle effects.
Exactly. Go predicts that because the torsion and chirality component of the vacuum tensor encodes specific geometric directions, the vacuum energy structure inside the cavity should actually be anisotropic.
Anisotropic meaning direction dependent.
Yes, dependent on orientation. This directional dependence, this underlying grain to the vacuum, should subtly modulate the way light interacts with matter, or even just vacuum fluctuations. And this should cause a slight but measurable shift or splitting in the spectral lines of light emitted or absorbed within the cavity, depending on the geometric alignment of the experimental setup relative to these vacuum fields.
Wow. Okay, that's a very precise, very low-level physical signature to look for. Beyond light, the theory also makes claims about the vacuum itself directly.
Indeed. In vacuum physics, particularly related to zero-point energy effects, the theory proposes measurable Casimir differentials.
Casimir effect. That's the force between two uncharged plates in a vacuum, right? Caused by vacuum fluctuations.
That's the one. Weigo argues that the inherent geometric properties of the vacuum, encoded in $6, should cause the measured Casimir force to differ slightly depending on things like the shape and, importantly, the material chirality, handedness of the plates used. This would be a deviation from standard QED predictions for the Casimir force.
And we absolutely must reiterate the crucial caveat here, just to be rigorous in reporting what the source material claims and doesn't claim. These are predicted geometry-dependent shifts in vacuum observables. The source is explicit. This is without making any over-unity energy claims, right? No free energy from the vacuum here.
Absolutely. That's a very important clarification. It's a prediction about subtle structural modification of existing known vacuum energy effects, not tapping some new source.
Got it. Okay, what else in physics?
Furthermore, Jorga makes a prediction concerning superconductivity. It predicts specific anisotropies again, directional dependencies in the measured noise spectrum of SQUEDs.
SQUEDs, superconducting quantum interference devices. They're incredibly sensitive magnetometers used to detect tiny magnetic fields. Why would they show directional noise?
Well, the reasoning goes, if the underlying vacuum possesses an anisotropic geometric structure encoded by these collar TX Steele fields originating from layer 3, then the delicate quantum interference process that a SQUED relies on should show a subtle directional fluctuation or noise pattern. It should depend on the SQUED's physical orientation relative to that background geometric field of the vacuum.
So detecting that anisotropic noise would be evidence that the vacuum isn't just empty space, but rather a structured, dynamic medium with a preferred directionality, as Gogo suggests.
Precisely. It would be strong support for the idea of a geometrically structured vacuum.
Now, what I find truly ambitious, maybe even audacious, is the theory's extension into the life sciences. If this single generative principle is really supposed to unify reality, it has to have something to say about biological coherence too, right?
That's the claim. The biological predictions largely center around identifying specific coherent signatures within living systems, signatures that should arise from the same fundamental principles.
Okay, like what?
For instance, in cellular and biophysics, Gijina suggests that key cellular structures, specifically microtubules, should exhibit measurable coherence bands in their vibrational or electromagnetic spectra.
Microtubules. Those are the protein polymers that form the cell's internal scaffolding, the cytoskeleton. Why focus on them?
Microtubules are highly regular, crystalline-like structures, and they've often been hypothesized, even outside of GIJA, in advanced biophysics research, as potentially being capable of sustaining coherent quantum phenomena, like acting as biological information processors or wires.
Right. Penrose and Hameroff's OR theory involves microtubules, for example.
Exactly. Gecko seems to align with that potential importance, suggesting their structural viability stems from an ability to maintain local coherence derived from the underlying ego principles. And this maintained coherence should be measurable, perhaps as a specific frequency band of activity that stands out from just random thermal noise.
Interesting. What else in biology?
The theory also predicts the viability of soliton propagation as a primary information-carrying mechanism within biological systems.
Solitons, those are those self-reinforcing stable wave packets, right? They travel without spreading out or losing shape.
That's correct. Unlike a normal wave pulse that disperses, a soliton maintains its integrity over long distances. In a biological context, Ego proposes that informational signals, perhaps carrying control information for development or function, could travel via these non-dispersive coherence waves, maybe through structures like microtubules or other ordered biological water channels.
And that would offer a mechanism for potentially ultra-fast, high-fidelity signaling within an organism, much faster than, say, chemical diffusion.
That's the idea. It suggests a physical pathway for maintaining informational integrity over distance and time within a complex biological system rooted in coherence.
Okay, and maybe the most targeted and frankly startling biological prediction comes in developmental biology. It relates directly to that chirality sector, $6 of the vacuum coherence tensor we discussed.
Yes, this involves regeneration. Specifically, Chigo proposes that the structural development, the actual process of becoming an organized form in highly regenerative organisms like planaria flatworms.
Those worms that can regrow their whole body from a tiny fragment.
Exactly those. The theory predicts that their regeneration process can be measurably biased by the application of external chirality fields.
Wait, so if you apply an external field that has a distinct handedness, a chiral bias, to a regenerating flatworm, the resulting biological structure, the way its cells divide or its body plan forms, should actually skew towards that imposed geometric bias from the field.
That is precisely the prediction. It's an astonishingly concrete and non-obvious prediction. It directly links the abstract geometry of the vacuum, specifically the $6 component related to handedness, to the observable macro-scale developmental behavior of a living organism.
If that were experimentally verified, that would be huge. It would seem to validate the claim that the geometric constraints defined way back in Layer 3 extend directly into influencing Layer 4's biological manifestations.
It would be a profound confirmation, yes. It bridges the gap between fundamental vacuum geometry and complex life processes in a very direct way.
This level of ambition really brings us back to the ultimate stated goal of generative ontology, providing a single generative principle that can potentially bridge mathematics, fundamental physics, and the complexities of life itself.
And the theory, or at least the source material describing it, is so comprehensive that it even includes a kind of internal measure of its expected success. It mentions a eureka scale.
A eureka scale? Seriously?
Apparently so. Lillian assigned a value of approximately 9.6 to 9.8 on this scale, supposedly representing the point where the formal mathematicalization is complete. The key physics evidence, like measuring those lambda coherence constants, is in, and the crucial biological confirmations, like demonstrating the planaria bias, are achieved.
So, a high degree of confidence predicted for eventual convergence, it seems. And what are the current immediate research steps needed to move towards that ambitious 9.8 score?
Well, as we've detailed, the absolute priority has to be experimental validation. That means first achieving experimental detection and measurement of those predicted coherence eigenvalues, the lambda, derived from the vacuum coherence tensor equation. That's a physics task.
Find the magic numbers.
Find the magic numbers. And second, detecting the proposed biological coherence signatures. That means finding those specific microtubule coherence bands, or successfully demonstrating the measurable regenerative bias in systems like planaria under applied chirality fields. These kinds of experiments will either begin to confirm EGO's geometric principles, or they'll force a fundamental revision of the framework. That's how science progresses. #tag outro.
Well, we have definitely completed a deep dive into generative ontology. We've journeyed from a really fundamental philosophical premise about becoming, all the way through to a complex, quantifiable theoretical architecture with specific predictions.
We started way back at the hololectic layer, layer 1, where reality is proposed to be rooted in just those simple mathematical axioms, $0, 011, and tiny dollars equals $1, defining a state of maximum coherence, math call 1.
From there, we trace the dynamic flow through the hololectic layer, layer 2, defined purely by symmetry preservation. And then we entered the critical relational layer, layer 3.
That's where the asymmetry generator, the operator analogous to observation and interaction, finally kicked in and commenced the structured reduction of coherence.
And that process, that irreversible projection, splits the vacuum coherence tensor into the geometric fields we now know: curvature, torsion, and chirality.
And that whole reduction cascade gives rise, finally, to layer 4, the derived layer, which contains everything we perceive and interact with.
From emergent mass, which we now understand in this context as pinned torsion.
Right, fundamentals.
To particles, fields, and even, remarkably, the subjective experience of qualia. So, hopefully you listening now have the conceptual tools, the architectural understanding, and the formal language to navigate this profoundly unifying, if definitely challenging, framework.
And as we wrap up, maybe let's circle back just one last time to perhaps the most fascinating conceptual anchor of the entire theory. The source material defines that asymmetry generator, A-teller, as the coherence-reducing flow, and it's explicitly called analogous to observation. This is the engine of differentiation, the thing that creates structure out of potentiality.
Okay, so if reality is structured by this continuous reduction cascade, this ongoing projection, and the act of observation or interaction is what causes that necessary reduction, it really does raise a truly provocative final question, doesn't it?
What are you thinking?
Does that imply that the very act of conscious perception, or even just the structuring of knowledge, the effort you put into understanding a complex concept like generative ontology right now, is that an essential, measurable part of the process of how reality continually manifests itself?
Are we, through our knowing and observing, actively participating in the other layer operation, forcing the universe out of its pure, undifferentiated potentiality in layer 2 and into the specific, differentiated, observable reality of layer 4?
What does it mean for you, the listener, to potentially be the asymmetry generator? Something to consider, perhaps, as your own temporary resonance stabilization continues its dynamic, governed flow.